The deck of the aircraft carrier was never silent. It breathed, it roared, it lived as if it were a city afloat, powered by thousands of sailors and the relentless thunder of fighter jets above. To most people, it was chaos. To her, it was rhythm. She moved among the others quietly, her boots striking the steel with a steady, almost unremarkable pace. Her uniform was plain, worn the same as every other sailor's, and her work was not glamorous. She loaded ammunition. She hauled crates, checked labels, and followed the endless rotation of supply runs that kept the ship alive. Nothing about. It seemed extraordinary, and that was exactly how she wanted it. The others knew her by name, but to most, she was the quiet one in the ammo bay. She rarely joined in the rough banter that echoed across the hangars, never sought the spotlight when crews relaxed in the mess hall. She smiled when spoken to, answered politely, and always returned to her work. Dependable, silent, unassuming. In a world that thrived on ranks, orders, and constant activity, she faded neatly into the background. But people noticed her all the same. "She's tough," one sailor would say after watching her lift a crate nearly twice her weight. "Never complains," another added. "She's got more discipline than most of us combined," an officer once remarked after seeing her. Stay on task during a stormy night when others faltered. She never corrected them. Praise slid off her like rain off steel. If they believed her strength came from training, from discipline, from some inner toughness that was forged on this very carrier, then let them think it. The truth was heavier. Before the Navy, before the carrier, she had been someone else entirely. But that story stayed locked away in her chest, just like the small ribbon she kept tucked deep in her uniform pocket. No one asked, and she never volunteered. For her, the past wasn't a tale worth retelling. She remembered the first time she stepped aboard the carrier, her boots striking the steel gangway, the ocean stretching endlessly around her. She had looked out at the horizon and felt the pull of two truths, that she was leaving behind a world of memories, and that she was beginning a new life, one where she could finally be ordinary. That was all she wanted. No medals, no recognition, no reminders of who she had been before. Every morning, she rose before dawn, her body already accustomed to the discipline long before the Navy demanded it. She folded her blanket with precision, tied her boots tightly, and walked the length of the ship with quiet focus. Others groaned, dragged themselves awake, muttered about long shifts ahead. She never did. Routine gave her peace. In the ammo bay, she found a strange kind of solace. It wasn't glamorous. No sailor ever dreamed of joining the Navy to haul heavy boxes of artillery shells or double-check inventory sheets. But the work mattered. Every crate stacked properly meant the pilots had what they needed. Every label checked meant safety for those who depended on accuracy. She wasn't flying jets into the sky or commanding fleets in the sea, but her hands, her care, kept the whole system moving. And that was enough. Or at least, she told herself it was. Sometimes, when the ship quieted in the late hours, when even the roaring engines dimmed to a low hum and the stars glittered above the black ocean, she would sit alone on the deck. The sea stretched forever, and the night air smelled of salt and steel. In those hours, the memories crept back, flashes of fire, of smoke, of men screaming as she dragged them across rubble. The metal had been heavy in her hands when they gave it to her. She had shoved it into her pocket the very next day, unable to look at it without feeling the weight of those she hadn't saved. She never wanted the Navy to know. She didn't want special treatment, or whispers that she didn't belong, or worse, admiration. She hadn't joined to be honored. She had joined because she wanted to serve in silence. She wanted to be part of something larger than herself, without her past defining her. And so, on the carrier, she lived as though her story began here. On the day she signed her enlistment papers. To the others, she was just another sailor. And that was perfect. Yet, the carrier was alive with watchful eyes. The officers observed. The Admiral, though distant, had a reputation for sharpness. Nothing on this ship went unnoticed forever. And while she believed she had buried her past deep enough to remain invisible, the truth was that no secret, no matter how carefully kept, could stay hidden at sea. For now, though, she carried crates and smiled softly at jokes she never repeated. She ate in silence, wrote letters home that left out the darkest details of her life, and slept with the steady hum of engines rocking her into dreams. Her shipmates saw only what she allowed them to see. A quiet sailor with strong arms, steady hands, and a heart dedicated to duty. The sea accepted her secret. The ship embraced her routine. And she convinced herself she could keep living like this, quietly, steadily, forever blending into the steel walls of the carrier. But fate has its own tide. And one day, when the Admiral's eyes lingered a second too long, when a ribbon slipped from its hiding place at the wrong moment, everything she had tried so hard to bury would rise again. For now, though, in those first days, she was only loading ammo on the carrier. And to the world around her, that was all she ever was. Life aboard an aircraft carrier is a strange blend of monotony and chaos. To outsiders, it looks like pure adrenaline. Jets screaming down the flight deck, sailors in color-coded uniforms sprinting under spinning rotors, officers shouting commands. But to the men and women who live there, the carrier is a floating city where routine is king. Every sailor has a role, and every role, no matter how small it seems, matters. For her, the role was simple: keep the ammunition flowing. The ammo bay was her world. It was cavernous, filled with stacked crates, metal racks, and the scent of oil and steel. Here, she was one of dozens tasked with maintaining the lifeline of the ship's firepower. Jets couldn't fly missions without her. Pilots couldn't complete sorties without the cartridges, missiles, and flares her team prepared. Yet when people thought of heroes, no one thought of the sailors hunched over clipboards and loading pellets. And that was exactly why she liked. Every morning began the same. She arrived before most, running her hand along the stacked crates, double-checking the tags, making sure nothing was out of place. The paperwork was endless, but she approached it with the same diligence. She gave the heavy lifting. Others sometimes cut corners. It's just a box, who cares? But she never allowed herself that luxury. One miscount, one mislabeled crate, could ripple into disaster for the pilots counting on precision. Her shipmates often marveled at her consistency. Does she ever take a break? They joked. She outlasts the engines themselves. Another said, watching her push through shifts longer than most could endure. The truth was simpler. She found comfort in the grind. The repetition gave her mind something steady to cling to, a wall to keep out the memories she still refused to revisit. Every crate lifted was a thought pushed away. Every box counted was a scream silenced. Still, despite her quiet presence, she wasn't invisible. One petty officer, Ramirez, had worked beside her for months. He noticed how she always volunteered for the late shifts when others avoided them. He saw how she jumped in when tasks required brute strength, even when others offered to take over. And he couldn't help but wonder why she, of all people, never seemed to complain. "You're not normal, you know," he teased one evening as they loaded flares into storage. She raised an eyebrow. "Define normal." "Normal is complaining about the heat, or the weight, or the hours. You just do it." She gave him the faintest of smiles. "Some things are easier when you stop talking and keep moving." He laughed, shaking his head. "You're a machine." But machines didn't bleed, and machines didn't dream. When she returned to her bunk at night, Sweat damp and aching, she sometimes lay awake staring at the ceiling. Around her, snores filled the quarters, sailors dreaming of home or adventure. She, however, dreamt of fire. Always fire. And yet, no one saw. To the officers, she was model material. Disciplined, efficient, respectful. To the sailors, she was dependable, the kind of person you wanted beside you in a storm. To herself, she was just surviving in plain sight. It wasn't only her work ethic that set her apart. It was the way she carried herself. Shoulders squared, gaze steady. Movements precise. Even in the smallest tasks, she acted as though lives depended on it. Perhaps because, once upon a time, they had. But she never explained, and no one pressed her. In the Navy, everyone had a story. Some were sons and daughters of veterans. Others had joined to escape small towns, debts, or broken homes. A few sought glory. Most sought stability. She blended in by never making her story known. People assumed she was like them, another sailor trying to find purpose in the vast machinery of the Navy. The carrier itself was relentless. It never slept. At dawn, she could hear the deck thunder with jet engines. By midday, the bay filled with sweat and shouts as teams rotated shifts. At night, the corridors glowed under harsh white light, and the ocean rocked the massive ship in a rhythm that could lull even the restless to sleep. But the work in the ammo bay never ended. Every mission drained supplies. Every drill required preparation. Some days, her arms trembled under the weight of repeated lifts, yet she forced them steady. She wouldn't let anyone see her falter. Her reputation grew quietly. New sailors were told, if you want to learn how to keep up, watch her. Supervisors noted her name more often in reports. And still, she didn't bask in it. She ate her meals quickly, spoke little, and returned to the bay when others lingered over coffee. If anyone asked her why she worked so hard, she gave simple answers. Because it matters. Because someone has to. Because it's my duty. All true, but none the full truth. There were rare moments, however, when her facade almost cracked. Once, during a safety drill, an explosion simulation triggered alarms and flashing lights. The younger sailors flinched, some stumbling in confusion. She, however, froze for only a heartbeat before snapping into motion, guiding two others toward the exit path as though she had rehearsed it 100 times. Afterward, Ramirez caught up to her. How do you stay so calm? Most of us nearly jumped out of our skins. She shrugged. I've seen worse. He frowned. Worse than this tub blowing up? She gave no answer, only walked away. He didn't press her. Everyone had scars in this line of work, though not everyone carried them openly. And so she continued, day after day, blending into the steel belly of the ship, a sailor defined by her ordinary role. She was the one who lifted the crates, checked the lists, and kept the flow steady. Nothing more, nothing less. Or so they thought. For beneath the plain uniform and unremarkable routine was a woman who had once stood in firestorms, who had once carried men twice her size across broken ground, who had once earned a medal she kept hidden in silence. But until the day it slipped into view, until the Admiral's sharp eyes noticed what no one else had, she would remain in their eyes what she wanted most to be, just an ordinary sailor. The carrier had its own pulse, but that morning the rhythm was different. Word had spread quickly through the corridors, passed from sailor to sailor with the urgency of a storm warning. The Admiral was coming aboard. Inspections were never casual affairs. They weren't just about checking the ship's readiness. They were about leadership, seeing who made the machine run. Every sailor knew that when an admiral walked the decks, every detail mattered. The shine of a boot, the crispness of a salute, the precision of a task being performed. One misstep, one slip, could stain a record for months. So the ship buzzed with nervous energy. Officers barked reminders. Uniforms straight, eyes sharp. Crew members double-checked their stations, wiping surfaces, tightening bolts that had already been tightened. Even the mess hall looked different, as though the Admiral might notice the way a tray had been stacked. But in the ammo bay, she remained the same. While others hurried with last-minute preparations, she moved steadily, lifting crate after crate with the same calm rhythm she always carried. Sweat darkened her collar, but her face betrayed no strain. If she knew the Admiral would soon be making his rounds, she gave no sign. Her hands stayed busy, her eyes focused on the labels in front of her. To her, the Admiral was just another officer. Higher ranked, sharper dressed, yes, but still a man doing his duty. She had no fear of being noticed, because why would he notice her? She was ordinary. She was meant to blend in. But fate has its own sense of irony. The Admiral arrived with the weight of command in his stride. Years of service clung to his posture, shoulders squared, eyes scanning with the efficiency of a man who had seen every kind of sailor the Navy could produce. His presence was not loud, but it carried an invisible gravity. Conversations dimmed when he passed. Salutes snapped sharper. His boots struck the steel with a rhythm that seemed to echo authority. He was not young, nor was he fragile. His face bore lines from sea winds and sleepless nights, but his gaze remained sharp, like a blade that refused to dull. He had led ships through storms, commanded men through wars, and watched both courage and cowardice reveal themselves under pressure. He had no illusions about people. He could read them in an instant, the way they stood, the way they spoke, the way they carried their silence. That was why, when he reached the ammo bay, he paused. At first glance, it was like any other storage area. Crates stacked with meticulous order, sailors moving in synchronized effort. But then he saw her. She was not rushing to impress, as some did when authority loomed. She was not stiff with nerves or wide-eyed with fear. She moved with quiet precision, lifting a crate, setting it down, marking her checklist. To anyone else, she might have seemed unremarkable. To him, she stood out for one reason. She carried herself differently. The Admiral had seen that posture before, in battle-hardened Marines, in pilots who had flown through firestorms, in men and women who had stared into the face of chaos and come out alive. It wasn't arrogance, nor was it simple discipline. It was presence. He folded his hands behind his back, watching longer than protocol required. The officers flanking him shifted uneasily, unsure why he lingered. One cleared his throat, offering to continue the tour, but the Admiral silenced him with a raised hand. His eyes stayed on her. She felt the gaze before she saw it. Years of instinct, honed long before the Navy, prickled the back of her neck. She straightened unconsciously, though she didn't break her rhythm. Crate, stack, record. Crate, stack, record. She had learned long ago not to let eyes rattle her, whether they belonged to strangers, allies, or enemies. But when she finally glanced up, her gaze met his. It was only for a heartbeat, but it was enough. His eyes were the kind that missed nothing. They probed, they measured, they weighed silently. She gave the smallest nod of respect and returned to her work, hoping the brief exchange would end there. Yet the Admiral did not move. The silence stretched, filled only by the sounds of labor around them. Nearby sailors noticed, their movements faltering as they realized who stood watching. Nervous glances flickered in her direction. Why her? Why? Was the Admiral's attention fixed on the quiet sailor in the ammo bay? Finally, one officer leaned closer, whispering, "Sir, she's just one of the loaders." "Should we?" The Admiral raised a finger, silencing him. His eyes remained locked on her. To the crew, The Admiral's inspection became something more that day. Whispers traveled quickly through the corridors. The old man stopped in the yaw. Ammo bay. He just stared at her. What's he seeing that we don't? She heard the murmurs, of course, but she ignored them. Gossip didn't matter. The only thing that mattered was the work in front of her. Let them speculate. She knew the truth. She was no different from them. She was only doing her duty. Still, deep inside, she couldn't shake the unease. The Admiral had looked at her the way no one else on the ship ever had. Not with camaraderie, not with curiosity, but with recognition. As if he had glimpsed something buried far beneath her quiet surface. And that unsettled her more than she cared to admit. Later that night, when the ship settled into its steady hum, she sat alone on the lower deck, staring out at the endless horizon. A sea reflected the starlight like shards of glass. She replayed the Admiral's eyes in her mind, sharp and searching. Why me? She muttered under her breath. Why now? But the sea offered no answers. She reached into her uniform pocket, fingers brushing the edge of the ribbon she kept hidden. For a moment, she considered throwing it overboard, letting the ocean swallow it forever. That would solve everything, wouldn't it? No chance of discovery, no reminder of what she had been before. But she couldn't. The metal was more than metal and ribbon. It was memory, promise, and burden all at once. To lose it would feel like erasing those she had carried through fire. So she left it there, tucked away, unseen. For now, at least. What she didn't know was that the Admiral had already seen enough. He couldn't name it yet, couldn't explain why she unsettled him. But his instincts rarely lied. He had spent decades reading sailors, and his gut told him this one was different. She was hiding something. Not weakness, not guilt, but something stronger. And the sea, relentless in its truth, had a way of dragging secrets into the light. The Admiral intended to find out what hers was. The morning was thick with heat, the kind that clung to uniforms and turned every breath into labor. Down in the ammo bay, the air carried the metallic tongue of steel, oil, and sweat. Crates lined the walls like towers in a city of war, each stamped with codes, each heavy with the weight of destruction waiting to be unleashed. She moved through it with practiced ease. Her hands gripped the wooden edges of a crate, muscles straining as she shifted it into place. To her, it was just another day, another shift, another box to be lifted and checked. But fate rarely announced itself before it struck. The Admiral had returned. His earlier inspection had not satisfied him. Something about the quiet sailor nagged at his instincts, the same instincts that had saved lives and guided decisions when hesitation could cost everything. He wasn't a man who left questions unanswered, and she was a question wrapped in silence. So he walked the corridors. Again, his entourage of officers trailing behind like shadows. They spoke, briefed, reported, but his focus wasn't on them. His mind was on the image of the woman in the ammo bay. When he arrived, she was there once more, bent to lift another crate. Sweat dampened her brow, but her movements were steady. She didn't look up. Perhaps she hadn't even noticed his presence. The Admiral watched closely. He was searching, though even he didn't yet know for what. Then it happened. The crate scraped against her uniform as she hoisted it, and for the briefest instant, something slipped free from her breast pocket. It caught the light. A glint of silver, a faint shimmer against the dull gray of her uniform. The ribbon's edge peeked out, betraying its hiding place. The Admiral's eyes narrowed. He had seen countless medals in his career service awards, commendations, ribbons of honor worn with pride across the chests of sailors and officers alike. But this one was different. It wasn't displayed. It was concealed, as though meant to remain unseen. His steps slowed, then stopped. The officers trailing him fell silent, sensing his attention had found its mark. The air in the bay shifted. "Hold there, sailor," the Admiral's voice cut across the room, steady and commanding. She froze, the crate balanced against her. Hip. Slowly she turned her head, meeting his gaze with the calmness she forced into her face. Her heart, however, slammed against her ribs. "Yes, sir?" The Admiral took a step closer, his boots echoing on the steel deck. "What's that you're carrying in your pocket?" A hush fell over the bay. Nearby sailors paused mid-task, eyes darting between her and the Admiral. Whispers stirred like a ripple in still water. She lowered the crate carefully, setting it onto the floor with deliberate slowness. Then she straightened, squaring her shoulders. "Sir?" she asked, feigning ignorance. But the Admiral's gaze was unwavering, sharp as a hawk's. He gestured slightly toward her uniform. "That medal. Why isn't it worn as regulation requires?" The whispers grew louder now. A medal? In her pocket? None of them had ever seen her wear one. None had even known she had one. Her throat tightened. She had lived months, years hiding it, burying it, ensuring it stayed tucked away where no one could pry. And now, in the space of a single careless moment, the secret she had guarded with silence lay exposed under the Admiral's scrutiny. Her mind raced. She could lie, dismiss it as nothing, claim it belonged to someone else. But the Admiral's eyes told her he wouldn't believe it. He was too experienced, too perceptive. He had already seen too much. So she drew a slow breath. "Permission to explain, sir," she said, her voice low. The Admiral gave a single nod. Granted. The silence in the bay deepened. Every ear strained, every eye locked on her. Even the steady hum of the ship seemed to fade. Her fingers reached into her pocket. She hesitated, the weight of the ribbon heavy even before she touched it. Then she pulled it free. The metal gleamed faintly under the harsh lights, its silver, edges catching the glow. The ribbon, faded but intact, draped across her fingers. It was not a Navy issue. Its design was foreign, unfamiliar to most of the crew. But even without recognition, everyone knew one thing: this was not ordinary. The Admiral's expression hardened, though not in anger. It was curiosity sharpened by authority. He leaned closer, studying the metal. "Where did you get this?" he asked, his tone neither harsh nor soft, but demanding truth. She swallowed. For a moment, she considered silence. But the weight of so many eyes, and the piercing intensity of his, left no room for retreat. "It wasn't earned here," she began, her voice steady, though her hands trembled slightly. "It was awarded. Before I joined, overseas, I wasn't. In uniform then, not this uniform." The whispers grew louder, confusion rippling through the sailors. Overseas? Awarded? She wasn't even a veteran when she enlisted. At least, that's what everyone had believed. The Admiral's gaze sharpened. "Explain." Her chest tightened. Memories surged. Fire, screams, the chaos of a world she had tried to leave behind. For months, she had buried it beneath routine, beneath crates and checklists and silence. But now, under the Admiral's command, the past clawed its way to the surface. "I was a medic," she said finally, "a civilian. I went where I wasn't supposed to be. When the fighting broke out, I stayed." Her voice wavered, but only for a moment. She forced it steady, unwilling to let the tremor betray her. "I pulled the wounded from the line, again and again, until the fire stopped, until reinforcements arrived. They gave me this medal after, but I didn't. I never felt I'd earned it. I wasn't there to fight. I only did what had to be done." The Admiral's eyes did not leave hers. The silence in the room was absolute now. Every sailor, every officer stood frozen, caught in the weight of her words. For a long moment, the Admiral said nothing. His gaze flicked from the metal to her face, reading the unspoken truth in the lines of her posture. Finally, he spoke. "You kept this hidden." "Yes, sir." "Why?" Her grip on the ribbon tightened. "Because I came here to serve, not to be remembered. Because medals don't matter if the people who needed saving are gone. Because I didn't want this," she lifted the medal slightly, "to define me." Her words struck harder than any weapon. Around her, the sailors shifted, uncomfortable yet awed. None of them had known. None had imagined that the quiet woman in the ammo bay had walked through fire before she ever set foot on the carrier. The Admiral's gaze softened. Only slightly. Recognition flickered there, not of the metal, but of the courage it represented. He gave a slow nod. "Very well." Then, turning to his officers, he spoke with the authority that carried across the bay. "This sailor has served with distinction long before she ever wore this uniform. And she continues to serve with distinction now. Remember that." The officers straightened, nodding quickly. The sailors stared in awe. And she, standing in the center of it all, lowered her eyes. For she had wanted only to remain ordinary. But the silver had gleamed, and the truth could no longer be hidden. The ammo bay had never been this silent. The steady clatter of crates, the scrape of boots, the murmur of orders, all had died away. Even the hum of the carrier's engines seemed distant, as though the ship itself was holding its breath. Every eye was fixed on her. The metal dangled in her hand, silver catching the dim light. The Admiral stood a few feet away, his presence filling the room like a tide pressing against a shore. His voice broke the silence, deep and measured. "Explain yourself, sailor." She shifted the ribbon in her grip, the fabric soft with age. "Sir, I told you already. It was awarded before I enlisted. I wasn't in uniform then." The Admiral's gaze narrowed. "Not good enough? Where? When? By whom?" Her heart thudded against her ribs. She could feel the weight of the crew's stares, their curiosity thick in the air. She had lived so long in anonymity, blending into the carrier's routines, burying her past under sweat and silence. Now it all threatened to come crashing into the open. She drew a slow breath. "Permission to speak freely, sir?" The Admiral gave a curt nod. "Granted." Her voice was quiet at first, though it carried clearly in the bay. "It was 3 years ago. I was overseas, not in uniform, not enlisted. I was a civilian medic working with an aid group. Our job was simple: bandage wounds, deliver supplies, patch people up. We were supposed to stay behind the lines, away from the fighting." Her eyes grew distant, unfocused, as the memories clawed. "To the surface. But wars don't respect lines. One night, the fighting moved faster than we could move. The compound where we stayed, it became a battlefield in minutes. Bullets snapped through the walls. Fire swallowed half the tents. People screamed, soldiers, civilians, anyone caught in it. The sailors leaned closer, riveted. This was not the story they expected from the quiet woman who spent her days stacking boxes. I should have run. We all should have. But I couldn't. Not when there were people still inside. Her fingers tightened around the metal until her knuckles whitened. So I went back. Once. Twice. I don't even know how many times, dragging anyone I could out through the smoke. I carried men twice my size, pulled them across rubble, patched wounds with my bare hands when supplies ran out. Her voice faltered, but she forced herself to continue. Some didn't make it. Too many didn't make it, but enough did. And when it was over, when the fire died and reinforcements finally pushed through, they told me I'd done something brave. She held up the medal, her eyes hard. So they gave me this. A piece of metal, as if that could balance the weight of all the lives I couldn't save. The silence that followed was heavier than the crates stacked around them. Sailors shifted. Uneasily, their earlier all tempered by the rawness of her words. She wasn't boasting. She wasn't even proud. She spoke like someone confessing a crime rather than recounting heroism. The Admiral studied her, his expression unreadable. He had seen men decorated for less. He had seen others brag about achievements, far smaller. But this sailor, she carried valor like a burden, not an honor. Finally, he asked, "Why hide it?" She met his eyes, her voice steady despite the storm in her chest. "Because I didn't come here for recognition. I didn't come to be a hero. I came to serve quietly, like anyone else. Medals don't lift crates. Medals don't keep this ship running. They're just reminders of what was lost." Her words rippled through the crew. Some looked at her with newfound respect, others with discomfort. Few could understand how someone could carry such a story and never speak of it. The Admiral stepped closer, his gaze never wavering. "Do you regret it?" The question pierced deeper than she expected. She hesitated. The images flashed behind her eyes, blood on her hands, smoke in her lungs, the weight of body she couldn't move fast enough. "Yes," she whispered. Then, after a pause, "And no." The Admiral tilted his head. "Explain." She drew a sharp breath. "I regret that I couldn't save them all. I regret every scream I couldn't silence, every face I still see when I close my eyes. But I don't regret staying. I don't regret carrying them. If I had walked away that night, I wouldn't be able to live with myself." The Admiral's lips pressed into a thin line. He recognized the truth in her words, the kind of truth that only those who had been tested in fire could speak. The officers standing behind him exchanged uneasy glances. One finally cleared his throat. "Sir, perhaps we should," the Admiral silenced him with a raised hand. His eyes stayed locked on her. "You believe this medal is meaningless?" She nodded once. "Meaningless to me. Yes. To the people I saved, maybe not. But I can't wear it. Not when it reminds me of those I lost." The Admiral considered this. For a long, tense moment, he said nothing. Then he spoke, his voice quiet, but carrying enough force to echo in every corner of the bay. "You think courage belongs only to those who survive without regret. You're wrong. True courage is standing in the fire, knowing you'll be scarred, and doing it anyway. That medal may burn you, but it's proof of what you carried, and proof of what you carry still." His words struck her like a blow. For the first time in years, she had no reply. The crew around them remained frozen, their respect deepening, with every word exchanged. To them, she was no longer just a quiet woman in the ammo bay. She was something more, something they struggled to name, but something undeniable. The Admiral finally straightened, his gaze softening just slightly. "You've done more than most will ever know. Don't diminish that. Not to yourself, and not to the people who look to you now." He turned to the officers, his voice sharp once again. "Record this sailor's account, and make sure her service here reflects not just her labor, but her valor." The officers snapped to attention, scribbling notes, though their eyes still flicked toward her in awe. She lowered her gaze, tucking the medal back into her pocket. The medal felt heavier than ever, but somehow lighter too. She had spoken aloud the words she thought she'd never share again. The truth was no longer hers alone. And though she still longed for silence, for anonymity, she knew it was too late. The Admiral had seen her. The crew had heard her. And the tide of her story could no longer be turned back. That night, alone in her bunk, she stared at the ceiling. The ship rocked gently, the engines humming below. In her pocket, the medal rested, its weight a familiar anchor. She thought of the Admiral's words. True courage is standing in the fire, knowing you'll be scarred and doing it anyway. Maybe, just maybe, he was right. But whether or not the world called her a hero, she knew the truth of herself. She was still the same woman who rose each morning, laced her boots, and hauled crates in the belly of a steel giant. Ordinary in duty, extraordinary only in silence. And she was determined to remain that way, even as the eyes of the ship began to see her differently. The carrier moved steadily across the endless horizon, but in the days that followed, the ship itself seemed changed. Word spread quickly, carried like sparks through dry grass. A sailor with a hidden medal. A past drenched in smoke and fire. An admiral who stopped an inspection to demand her story. By the third evening, her name was on the lips of sailors she had never spoken to. Mess hall conversations hushed when she entered. Even in the silence of the bunkroom, she could feel eyes flicker toward her, respectful but curious, as if she carried a secret larger than the sea itself. The Admiral summoned her again, not to the ammo bay, but to his private quarters. She stood stiffly in front of his desk, the medal in her pocket once more, though now it felt less like contraband and more like a chain. The Admiral's expression was calm, but his eyes carried that same unrelenting focus. "Sit," he said simply. She obeyed, folding her hands in her lap, her gaze on the polished wood of the desk. He studied her for a long moment before speaking. "What you told me the other day, it was not the whole story." Her jaw tightened. "Sir, with respect, I told you enough." The Admiral leaned forward slightly. "Enough for the crew. Not for me. You think I don't recognize the way you carry yourself? I've seen combat veterans with fewer scars in their eyes. If you want to hide from the rest, fine, but you won't hide from me. Tell it all, from the beginning." She hesitated, her chest rising and falling as the memories pressed against her ribs. Part of her wanted to refuse, to bury it deeper. But another part, a part that had begun to stir ever since the silver had caught the light, wondered if perhaps speaking it aloud might finally loosen the grip of the ghosts. She met his gaze, steady but weary. "You really want to know?" "I wouldn't ask if I didn't," he replied. So she began. It was supposed to be a safe zone. We were medics, volunteers, aid workers. The compound wasn't fortified, just canvas tents, metal cots, and boxes of bandages stacked under tarps. We treated children, farmers, soldiers. When they stumbled back from the line, everyone came to us. Everyone trusted us. Her eyes grew distant, her voice dropping to something softer, heavier. Then one night, the world ended. Gunfire cracked out of the dark, closer than we'd ever heard. Mortar whistled overhead. One hit the edge of the compound, tore the ground open like the earth itself had screamed. The blast lit the sky, and suddenly everything was fire and blood. She paused, her fingers twitching slightly in her lap, as though they still felt the heat of that night. I remember the first body. A soldier, young, maybe 19. He'd been on a cot near the wall when the explosion came. The shrapnel... She stopped, shaking her head. I moved him, but it was too late. And that was when I realized no one was coming for us. Not yet. Reinforcements were hours away. If anyone was going to survive, it was up to us. Her voice gained a rhythm, each word pulling the Admiral deeper into the memory. I grabbed what I could. Bandages, a flashlight. I didn't think about the danger, not at first. Just the screams. I followed them into the smoke. There were men pinned under canvas poles, women clutching wounds too deep for cloth to hold. I dragged them out one by one, laid them in the open, shouted for anyone with strength left to help me. Her hands clenched. Every trip back inside was worse. Bullets snapped through the tents. Fire licked the canvas. The air was so thick I thought my lungs would tear. But I kept going. Not because I was brave, but because the thought of leaving someone behind burned hotter than the flames. Her. Voice cracked, just slightly. "I carried a boy once, no older than 15. His leg was gone. I don't even know how I got him outside. He died in my arms anyway." The Admiral's jaw tightened, but he did not interrupt. Her story poured out, unstoppable now. I lost count of how many trips I made. 5? 10? More? Every time I swore it was the last, and every time I turned back when I heard another cry. I didn't think about living. I didn't think about dying. I just thought, one more. If I can just get one more out. Her voice fell into silence. For a moment, the room seemed smaller, thick with the weight of her memory. When dawn came, the fire was out. The compound was rubble. Half my team was gone. But those who lived, they said I'd save them. They pressed this metal into my hand like it was supposed to fix everything. I didn't want it. I wanted the ones I couldn't save. She pulled the metal from her pocket, placing it on the desk between them. The silver caught the light once more, cold and unyielding. That's the truth, not glory, not heroism. Just a night of screams and smoke that I can't forget. For a long time, the Admiral said nothing. His eyes stayed on the metal, then lifted to hers. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter than she'd ever heard it. "I've commanded men who wore ribbons across their chests and never faced half of what you described. You think this makes you less? It makes you more. Not because of the metal, but because you carried fire and kept walking." She shook her head. "You don't understand. I'm not haunted by what I did. I'm haunted by what I couldn't do. Every face I left behind stays with me. Every night I hear them. That's not honor, sir. That's punishment." The Admiral leaned back slowly, his expression unreadable. "And yet, here you are, still standing, still serving. That's what separates you from the rest. You endured. You keep enduring." His words lingered in the air like a verdict. The clock ticked quietly on the wall. She stared at the metal, her jaw clenched. For the first time since that night, she had spoken every detail aloud. And though the memories still burned, there was an unfamiliar weight lifting from her chest, not gone, but shifted, as though she no longer bore it entirely alone. The Admiral finally stood, his figure tall against the glow of the cabin's lamp. He slid the metal gently back across the desk toward her. "Keep it, not as a burden, as proof. Not of who you couldn't save, but of who you did." She hesitated, then picked it up, the cool metal pressing into her palm. The Admiral's gaze softened just slightly. "The sea has a way of finding those who've already survived storms. You belong here more than you think." She swallowed, nodding once. And in that moment, though the ghost still lingered, she felt something shift inside her. Not forgiveness, not peace, but perhaps the first step toward both. That night, when she returned to her bunk, the whispers of the crew followed her still. But now, when she closed her eyes, the fire in her memories did not seem quite as consuming. For the first time in years, she had shared the weight, and the Admiral's words echoed in her mind. You endured. You keep enduring. Perhaps that, more than anything, was what the metal truly meant. The carrier plowed onward through the Pacific, a floating city of steel and salt. Yet to those who lived inside its walls, something intangible had shifted. Conversations in the mess hall bent toward hushed tones when she walked in. Sailors who had once passed her by without a glance now nodded respectfully, some even standing a little straighter. She hadn't asked for it. She hadn't wanted it. But the weight of the truth, once spoken, could not be unsaid. The Admiral knew this better than anyone. He stood alone in his quarters one evening, staring out through the narrow window at the endless stretch of black water. The sea reflected no answers, only the pale shimmer of moonlight. His thoughts circled the sailor who had carried fire, and silence in equal measure. She was more than she appeared. That much was clear. But what was he to do with that knowledge? On the one hand, regulations were regulations. Medals, foreign or not, were to be declared, recorded, and worn with proper documentation. By the book, she had concealed her past, hidden her record. That alone could justify disciplinary action. Yet the Admiral wasn't a man bound only by ink on paper. He was a man shaped by decades of war, by men and women who had proven themselves not through the shine of their uniforms, but through the grit of their endurance. He had seen cowards decorated and heroes forgotten. And as he weighed her story, he knew which side she belonged to. He tapped his fingers lightly against the desk, the steady rhythm echoing the churn of the ship's engines. He thought of the crew, how they had looked at her in the ammo bay, how their awe had lingered days after. Sailors needed symbols, anchors of courage to steady them through storms. And whether she liked it or not, she had become one. The next morning, he summoned his senior officers. They gathered in the strategy room. Maps sprawled across the central table, but his agenda had little to do with charts or patrol routes. "You've all heard by now," he began, his voice carrying the weight of command. The sailor with the medal. The story she carried. A murmur ran through the room, but no one dared speak outright. The Admiral's gaze swept them like a searchlight. "I want your thoughts. Speak freely." Commander Howe, sharp-eyed and by the book, cleared his throat first. "Sir, regulations are clear." She should have disclosed the medal upon enlistment. Concealing it raises questions of integrity. Lieutenant Graves, older and slower in manner, shook his head. "With respect, sir, medals don't save ships. People do. She's been one of the hardest workers in the bay. If she wanted to keep her past quiet, maybe it's because she wanted to prove herself all over again." Another officer, young and fiery, leaned forward. "Sir, the crew already sees her differently. She's become something of a legend. If we punish her, it'll crush morale. If we elevate her, it could inspire them." The Admiral listened, his face unreadable. Each point was valid, each rooted in truth. But he already knew the course he would set. Later that afternoon, he found her once more. She was in the hangar this time, guiding the loading of crates, her movements efficient, her face focused. She worked as though nothing had changed, though the sideways glances from others told a different story. "Sailor," the Admiral called, his voice cutting across the cavernous space. She straightened immediately, saluting. "Sir." "Walk with me." They moved together through the carrier's passageways, the clang of their boots echoing in rhythm. At last, they stopped at the observation deck, where the sea stretched unbroken to the horizon. The Admiral turned to her. "You've caused quite a stir." Her jaw tightened. "Unintentionally, sir." "I know," he said. "But intention doesn't erase impact. You've become a symbol aboard this ship, whether you like it or not." She shook her head, her eyes hard. "I didn't enlist to be a symbol. I enlisted to serve, to work, to contribute without—" She gestured vaguely. "Without all this." The Admiral studied her, his gaze steady. "Tell me, do you think courage is wasted if it's unseen?" She frowned, caught off guard by the question. "I don't know. Maybe not. But I never wanted to be measured by one night I can't forget." "Then let me ask you another." The Admiral said, "Do you believe the men and women you saved would want you to bury that night forever? Or would they want others to see what survival looks like?" She opened her mouth, then closed it. The sea wind tugged at her hair, filling the silence she couldn't break. The Admiral finally spoke the decision he had carried in his chest. Since the night she told her story, "You'll remain where you are for now, in the bay with your crew. No punishment, no transfer, but I want you to understand something. That medal is not just yours. It belongs to every sailor who looks at you and remembers what courage costs. I won't force you to wear it. But neither will I let you pretend it doesn't exist." Her throat tightened. "Sir," he lifted a hand, silencing her. "You wanted anonymity. I understand that. But there are times when silence robs others of the very strength they need. Like it or not, you've been given a role on this ship. Not by me, by them." He nodded toward the decks below, where sailors moved like ants in the machinery of war. She followed his gaze, watching the crew bustle across the steel. Their lives pressed forward with routine, but she could feel it, the way eyes lingered, the way respect had shifted. She clenched her fists, torn between resentment and reluctant acceptance. That night, as the ship rocked gently under the stars, she sat alone with the medal in her hand. She turned it over, the silver catching the faint light. For so long she had seen it as a reminder of screams and fire. But now she saw flickers of something else, the faces of those who had survived because she hadn't turned away. She could still hear the Admiral's words. "That medal is not just yours." And though her instinct was to resist, to bury it deeper, she began to wonder if perhaps carrying it openly might not be weakness, but a kind of service in itself. And next morning, she returned to duty as always. But when she walked through the bay, conversations fell silent in a new way, not hushed. Whispers of gossip, but the quiet acknowledgement of someone who had carried fire and come out the other side. And tucked in her pocket, the medal still waited. She hadn't worn it yet, but she no longer thought of it as hidden. And the Admiral, watching from afar, allowed himself the smallest nod of approval. For decisions were not only about punishment or reward. Sometimes they were about planting seeds, seeds that might take root in the silence of a single sailor's heart and grow into the courage of an entire crew. Dawn spilled across the horizon like molten gold, painting the carrier's steel decks in a light that softened their edges. The ship cut forward through calm waters, its wake stretching behind like a memory that refused to fade. She stood, her usual post in the ammo bay, sleeves rolled, sweat clinging to her brow as she hauled crates with steady rhythm. To anyone passing by, it might have looked like any other day. But those who worked beside her knew better. The air around her carried something new. A weight, yes, but also a presence. Where once she had been invisible, just another pair of hands in the belly of the ship, now sailors sought her with their eyes, drawn to her quiet steadiness. It wasn't the medal they respected, for she still hadn't worn it. It was the story they carried now, whispered from bunk to bunk, from deck to deck. The story of fire, of smoke, of a woman who had gone back again and again into the flames when anyone else would have fled. And though she would never say it aloud, she felt the change too. The Admiral had made his decision clear. No punishment, no forced elevation, no demand that she wear what she did not wish to. Yet his words lingered like the salt air in her lungs. That medal is not just yours. At first, she resisted. Each night she sat on her bunk with the medal in her palm, weighing it like a stone. She saw the faces she had lost, the bodies she couldn't save, the screams that still haunted her dreams. But gradually, another image began to press against the edges of her memory, the faces of those who had lived. The young soldier who had walked again after she dragged him from the rubble. The woman who had clasped her hands in gratitude as dawn broke. The child whose cries had quieted in her arms. The medal, once only a burden, began to shift in meaning. It wasn't just hers. It was theirs. One evening, as the sun bled into the sea, the Admiral summoned her to the deck. The wind was strong, whipping waves into white foam far below. He stood with his hands clasped behind his back, eyes on the horizon. "You've thought about what I said," he remarked, not asking but knowing. She nodded. "Yes, sir." "And?" Her fingers brushed the metal in her pocket. I still don't believe it belongs to me alone. But maybe that's the point. Maybe I've been holding it in the wrong way. The Admiral glanced at her, his gaze sharp but not unkind. Go on. She swallowed, the words difficult but steady. I can't wear it as a symbol of pride. That will never sit right with me. But I can carry it as a reminder, not of me, but of those who survived. And if seeing it helps someone else find their strength, then maybe it's worth more than the silence I've kept. The Admiral gave a single approving nod. Then you found your answer. The next morning, the change came quietly. When she reported for duty in the ammo bay, the silver medal was pinned neatly above her chest. Not with polish or ceremony, but simply as regulations required. She didn't draw attention to it, didn't explain, didn't boast. She just went to work, lifting, hauling, directing, her hands blackened with grease and sweat as always. But the crew noticed, eyes widened, whispers rippled, and slowly something profound settled over the bay. Not awe, not gossip, but a quiet respect that ran deeper than words. For the first time, she had let her story walk beside her, instead of keeping it buried in her pocket. And in that moment, she became more than a sailor. She became a symbol. The weeks passed, and the legend grew. Sailors spoke of her in the mess, not as a distant myth, but as one of their own. New recruits looked at her with wide eyes, drawing courage from the fact that someone so unassuming, so ordinary in appearance, could have walked through fire and still carried crates at their side. She never gave speeches. She never sought attention. But her silence itself became its own kind of power, the reminder that true strength needed no announcement. The Admiral watched all this from afar, never interfering, never pushing further. He had made his decision, and he saw now that it had been the right one. Sometimes leadership was not about commanding a story, but allowing it to breathe. Then came the night of the storm. The carrier found itself caught in a squall, waves pounding the hull, lightning clawing across the sky. The decks slickened with rain, the winds howled like a living beast. Crates in the hangar broke loose, slamming against the walls with deadly force. Panic flickered among the crew. Orders were shouted, men scrambled, but the chaos threatened to overwhelm them. And in the midst of it, she moved, calm, steady, unyielding. She threw herself into the fray, seizing ropes, steadying crates, barking instructions with a voice that cut through the storm. Her presence anchored them, steadied them, reminded them that panic was not an option. Later, when the seas calmed and the storm had passed, the sailors spoke of it in reverent tones. She didn't flinch, they said. She didn't falter. She carried us through. The metal on her chest gleamed faintly under the emergency lights, not as decoration, but as confirmation of what everyone already knew. She was more than the sum of her silence. Months later, when the carrier finally returned to port, the Admiral stood on deck as the crew disembarked. Families wept, officers saluted. The city's skyline loomed against the setting sun. He spotted her among the sailors, her posture straight, her medal shining faintly in the light. She wasn't in front, wasn't singled out, wasn't celebrated in parades or speeches. But those who had served beside her knew. And for them, that was enough. As she stepped onto solid ground, the Admiral felt a rare swell of pride. Not for medals, not for victories, but for the quiet kind of courage that shaped legacies without demanding them. Years later, long after that tour had ended, stories of her would still circulate in the Navy. New recruits would hear whispers of the woman who worked in the ammo bay, who hid a medal only to wear it not for herself, but for those she saved. Some would say she was a hero. Others would say she was simply a sailor who did her duty. But those who had stood beside her knew the truth. She was both. And in the silence of her example, they found the strength to carry their own burdens. On the night she finally retired, years later, she placed the medal in a simple wooden box and set it on her shelf. Not as a trophy, not as a weight, but as a reminder of endurance. And when she closed her eyes, she no longer heard only screams. She heard voices of survival, of gratitude, of life carried forward. The Admiral's words had proven true. Courage was not the absence of scars, but the will to walk forward despite them. That was her legacy, not the medal, not the story, but the endurance to keep enduring, and in doing so, to teach others the same.